And we're so excited about this collaboration between Adele and Eleanor. We've been talking about it for the past 18 months, I think. And so looking forward to the talk. And your inspiration from the found objects. Over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Well, first of all, maybe I think we know quite a few people, but we'll introduce ourselves. Anyway, I'm Eleanor Lakelin, and I make work in wood. I make sculptural vessels and forms, usually turned on a lathe and then hollowed and carved or sandblasted.
I'm Adele Brereton. I trained as a silversmith and jeweller in Edinburgh, and I predominantly work in precious metals, but my work encompasses sort of three areas of objects, and I also make precious jewellery and contemporary jewellery. But something that underpins everything I make is this hand raising process, which is where you have a flat sheet of metal and you're hammering into a hollow form.
And the sort of starting point for the exhibition is because we both live and work in Deptford. We both have studios at Cockpit Arts in Deptford, and we've lived and worked in that area for many years. And in fact, for quite a few years, we had neighbouring studios at Cockpit Arts, so we know each other's work very well. And what is interesting is that if you go into both of our studios, which we had planned originally for everybody to become, but anyway, it didn't work because of COVID, but you would see that many of the things that we have collected and many of the materials and the objects that we find inspiration from are very similar, or they have a similar feel at least, and so many of them are interchangeable in our studios.
Yeah, we have to sort of share a visual language with the shelves of collections that we have. But at the same time, we grew up in quite different areas, and so the things that we've collected have slight differences. So Eleanor grew up in a remote village in mid Wales and has quite natural surroundings inspiring the things that she found. So eroded pieces of wood and sun-bleached bones, pebbles, and broken eggshells. And mine are much more industrial, because I was growing up in southeast London, so I dug things up in the garden, and old Victorian smoking pipes and shards of pottery. And yeah, there's that sort of industrial connection. Things that people have made and owned and discarded, lost, they're all sort of broken. Yeah.
And so when we started thinking about the show, we didn't want to be really prescriptive, and we didn't want to kind of make a plan and stick to it. We wanted to sort of embrace chance in the way that happens if you find objects or you find bits of material. So we wanted luck and coincidence and chance to be sort of working partners in the making of the show, and we wanted it to sort of develop organically, I suppose. We wanted forms to emerge, and we wanted the show to grow, I suppose. And so we wanted it to sort of develop, and the story to develop as we found objects and looked at them and made work and were inspired by different bits of work. And obviously that meant that there were times when that was a bit nerve-wracking. But we sort of trusted in the process and carried on.
So our sort of starting point was to go and look for the objects. So we got our Port of London Authority permits to go mudlarking. And we went down to the river quite a few times over the period of a few months. And
near our studios?
Yeah, just down the road, 5 minutes away. And we overlooked Deptford Creek, which leads into the river at Greenwich. So we collected numerous things, bags and bags of things, and we would bring them back to the studio and spend some time washing them, looking at what we'd found, focusing on textures and forms predominantly. Sometimes certain things just look like they belong together, and some things you felt more drawn to, and other things I was more drawn to.
Yeah. But I think we both have a similar sense of, we both really enjoy the sort of mystery and the power of objects, and that whole seduction, I suppose, of objects, and that idea that if you collect something or you hold something in your pocket when you're a child or in your hand, that you can be connected to a different time or a different place and to a memory, and that that story or narrative is embedded in that object. And so particularly, so on our walks to the foreshore, by sort of picking things up, we already have a sort of souvenir, a mark, that event. And the found objects from the foreshore obviously have a particular power, those objects, because they are, as the tide recedes, and what's thrown up is a sort of layers of London history and evidence of both the people, the industries, the culture of people who have shared the location that we do for many centuries. And so all of that sort of history is kind of embedded in those objects.
And when we were, particularly where we were at a place called Wood Wharf, funnily enough, and we found that there were an awful lot of the same type of thing in that area. So there was tons of bits of shipping, metal, loads of rivets and nails and chain and
from the shipbuilders.
Yeah. And then also lots of bone.
Yes, we've got a few bones.
Yeah. We have. There were so many bones. It's difficult to. There was bones and bones and bones.
We had a lot of bones.
Bags of bones. And I mean, there's theories, isn't there, about
why they're there?
Yes. That obviously there's abattoirs, or there's all sorts of industries all along the river, but also and obviously from people throwing in the remains of food. And there's obviously a story that some of these are boar bones from the Tudor royal palaces, where Henry VIII was kind of feasting for many, and everybody's lobbing the bones in the river. Obviously could be possible, but I think there's also a theory that because of the concave, it's to do with the bends in the river, I think, and that certain things, it must be to do with weight and tide, and certain things tend to kind of, so the concave bit of Greenwich, they seem to suggest kind of attract, I don't know.
Yeah.
So we're talking about objects and...
Oh, thank you. So I think what draws us to objects that we find is how tactile they are. I think we're both really interested in the feel of things, and that definitely comes through in our work, and that's a very important part of what we make as well. Just to have this slightly irregular, not perfect form or edge, texture, and the erosion process. We're sort of translating that into the work as well.
Yes, I think it's sort of, I think we both have a particular sense of what is precious about material or objects or not. And obviously my own material is quite particular. I don't particularly use what's precious wood. I tend to use wood where the properties of the wood help me to kind of explore certain ideas. So I would choose wood like cedar or sequoia, always grown in Britain, and always fell due to decay. But I would use that because they grow differently during the seasons. They grow very quickly in spring and summer, and very slowly in the winter. And so I can sandblast away that spring wood that has grown really quickly, and then I will get like a sense of speeded up erosion. So whereas something has been eroded in the river for however many centuries, I can sort of explore that idea through the properties of different woods. Or sometimes Well, always, I'm really interested in the provenance, the story behind the wood. And that, for me, is the precious thing. So, for example, these 3 pieces of cedar, this tree was planted by the Duke of Wellington in 1827. And I nearly always know where the trees I use come from. So this was lucky because I was looking for a tree that would sandblast, and I looked in my store and I just found one lump of this cedar that I had used in 2015 because a tree on the National Trust, the Duke of Wellington had planted this tree in 1827 at Kingston Lacey in Dorset, and then they had to cut it down because it was decayed. And then as it approached the bicentennial of Waterloo in 2015, they sort of went, oh, we've got a tree that the Duke of Wellington planted in the quarry. So they asked me to make this work for the house made out of that tree. Anyway, so this is a little chunk left. So for me, the properties of the wood or the story is the kind of preciousness of the material. And for you...
So the material I use is precious, but that's not really why I use it. It's because of the properties. So this lovely white matte finish that you can see, you can't really achieve that with other metals. It's also really malleable, so quite a lot of these are made with Britannia silver, which is slightly softer than sterling, and you can mould it better with a hammer. And it also has that white finish. But I suppose the way that I use it is slightly intimidating when you have a very expensive piece of metal in front of you. But for this one over here particularly, I think it was more to do with not so much the material, but what I can achieve with it. And I've jumped ahead.
Doesn't matter. The starting point. Anyway, we were just going to talk about how the work. How it sort of got going, and we started off having collected an enormous amount of finds. We sort of went off and basically started working on our own for a bit. So I made some hollow vessels and was looking at these kind of textures of all of these bits of wood that we had found, this sort of eroded idea. And then in the work that I usually make, the carving. I nearly always make a shape on the lathe and hollow it out and then carve or sandblast or do something with it. But the shapes I usually carve are some kind of seed-like texture, often sort of lumps and protrusions, I suppose. And when we looked at the finds, nearly everything was to do with cavities or convex kind of feeling, or nets or chains or holes, basically pierced forms. So the first piece I made that I actually liked, there was a very awful lot on the cutting room floor before this, but the first piece I made that I liked was that piece over there, which was based on all of that idea of cavities and pierced material, and it meant turning it very, very thin and then carving out the bits in between, and then it's very, very light, so by the end it became very difficult to hold it when you pressure on it because it's so... and then I sandblasted it to take away even more material. And then that was quite interesting, wasn't it? Because at the same time...
because we simultaneously, without knowing it, we're working on those pieces. And then we brought them together.
So we kept coming together.
We're definitely influenced by the same things.
Yeah, so that's quite interesting.
So that silver one, I was looking at recycling silver, and I had lots of pieces of scrap in the studio, and I melted them all down into about 12 different nuggets, and each one I've pushed it to its absolute limit through hammering, forging, putting it through a rolling mill, and then reticulating the surface with a flame, so you get this really irregular surface texture, and then I sort of curate it. Put the pieces back together again, and I couldn't quite get the form right, and then I went down to Eleanor's studio and she had turned a little cedar ball that was about the right size, and it had a big crack in it, so she couldn't use it, so I used that to form the silver into the shape.
Fantastic. So how many pieces of silver are there, the little pieces?
I think it is about 10 or 12. I haven't counted them, but then they're held together really gently with very fine wires, so you drill little holes, 0.5 millimeters.
Wow.
put a tiny wire through and then you beat the end with heat so it melts towards the hole.
Beautiful.
So, well, I don't think we won't go through every piece. That obviously that was based on one of these bowls, wasn't it? The bowl form and also all of the cavities. But perhaps we'll talk just very briefly about this, which is because that's about found objects really, and actually using the found objects. And one day when we went to the foreshore, we found this piece of metal with holes in it. It was probably something to do with a strap. Maybe there's lots and lots of shipbuilding. There was lots of shipbuilding in that area of London. So there are piles and piles of this kind of material, of rusted metal nails and whatnot. And then we also found this, which is obviously a quite modern knocked vessel, which is beautifully rusted. And so that was sort of quite straightforward to sort of work out. We did lots of piling up of things.
Yeah, the bottle belonged in the hole.
It did.
So
we had
two more materials to work with. So it was inevitable, that piece.
Yeah. And so this is made from bog oak. So, and all of this had obviously been submerged. Well, the metal bits, the rusted bits, and this is made of 5,000-year-old bog oak, which was found in the Thames underwater for 5,000 years. So it's a sort of it made sense, didn't it, as a piece?
What about this piece? Can you say a little bit about this piece, how it came together?
Okay, well, Eleanor created the wooden piece underneath based on that bone.
Looking at lots of bones. Strange tree.
So it seemed sort of natural that it needed some things in it. But these forms are based on the smoking pipe, the broken smoking pipe also, which is quite a strong influence in a lot of my work.